using this hearing to take shots at our favorite political nemesis. And I see some members practically patting themselves on the back when they get a good insult or counterpoint in. But this isn't a game. Oversight isn't a game.
This is the House Oversight Committee, guys. I appreciate you guys for watching. I always want to keep people, the reason why I post a lot of these videos is like a lot of people, you hear them talk in social media, you hear them talk around the world. And to be honest with you, a lot of these people don't know the facts. Forbes show live hearings of many things. The hearing where they were grilling Joe Biden's son about his involvement with corruption overseas, Mayorkas with the border, the FBI director, with you name it, it's here in the House, or the House hearings, and different senators on the committee grilling these people that are nominated by the president or whoever to ascertain certain positions. Either they want to be involved in the courts, or they want to be any part of government. And so I love to watch these because this is the source of the information. You're not hearing it on on the news, and a lot of times what transpires here, you don't hear it in the news until days, sometimes weeks later. Laws that are being passed, laws that are being pushed, whatever the agenda that's important, they bring it up at these hearings, and you can watch it, way before the news media has it. So I love to watch Forbes. And a lot of people don't like to watch these. They just like to see quick, snippets of the news, but not me. I don't want to wait for Fox to tell me. I like to watch directly the hearings in Congress to see what really goes on and what really affects me and what these senators are being concerned by. I want to be concerned by the same thing, So let's just watch this and thank you for joining, guys. I'm Mr. Black Mamba 305. I do a lot of political commentaries, live viewings of what goes on Forbes or in Congress. And, I also do a lot of firearm content. I'm a huge 2A advocate. So my channel mostly, explore, firearms related subjects and, and anything that has to do with politics. So stay tuned and let's watch.
Under this Republican majority, we have wasted month after month censuring, expelling, holding people in contempt, and almost impeaching. And for what? Republicans have passed nothing of substance in the House. What our Oversight Committee should be doing, instead of spending now dozens of hours arguing about Hunter Biden, is real oversight of issues that affect all Americans, like corporate price gouging, unconstitutional government surveillance, and waste at the Pentagon. The fact that members think that real Americans outside of this partisan environment on Capitol Hill care about this is everything that is wrong with Washington. So that Americans who love this country and just want a better future don't have to listen to hours of frustrating attacks and procedural debates in a partisan game, let me sum it up. One.
Now, she makes some good points in saying that the back and forth between congressmen and congresswomen, talking about stuff that we might deem irrelevant. Yes, she does make a good point. Yes, when they could have been really getting to the nitty gritty of things or what Americans really, are more concerned about. But at the same time, if you know anything, you don't just go to your boss one day and say, hey, I need a raise. It doesn't work like that. She's coming from a very rudimentary, elementary way of thinking, which is fine. We all see government stuff. We all say to ourselves, oh, if I was in government, I could do this. But it's not that easy. A lot of times there are a lot of factors at work why things don't get passed, a lot of hands that has to be greased, a lot of hands shaking behind the scenes. So yes, when you go into politics, and I think she's fairly new too, when you go into politics and you don't really know the environment and the landscape, and you go, say for instance, you were to become, a senator, and you went to the White House and you're there representing your state. You don't just walk in and get things done all, wide-eyed, and no, it doesn't work like that. You know, you can think you have the best mind in the business, but if you're not partnership with the right people, if you're not greasing the right hands, if you're not kissing certain, you know, people's hands, certain people's rings, a lot of the things that you push that you think are so easy to get past are not going to get past. So what she's saying is true, you know, both, not just only for Republicans, but for Democrats too. You know, a lot of Republicans have blocked a lot of agendas that were good for the public that the that Democrats put forward and vice versa. And so, you know, you can't just listen to, you know, what these people say. She's coming, she's making a statement that's good, but at the same time, it's not as simple as you'd like to think. But let's keep listening.
There is zero evidence of President Biden doing anything wrong, including in connection with his son. No evidence of an impeachable offense, not a little, not something, none.
Obviously, we know she's a Democrat because that's the only reason why she say that.
To testify in public, in front of this committee.
Now, guys, now when she talk about Hunter Biden has offered to testify, he came to testify and he didn't say a damn word. Like, he offered to testify, but if you watch the hearing, he did not. He said a whole lot of nothing. He pretty much didn't say anything. They asked him question after question, and he just did not say anything. And that was not cool. I didn't really appreciate that. A lot of them come to the hearing to be questioned and answer those questions, and they just keep saying, I'm not aware. I'm not aware. I don't know. Like, how do you say something on the internet and then you know you're coming to a hearing, and when they ask you about it, I'm not aware. I don't know. I'm not aware. That's all they say. So when she's talking about Hunter Biden, you know, agreed to come to test. Yes, he did agree, but he did not say anything. He just kept looking towards his lawyer, not answering the question. So she's a little bit full of it. You know what I mean? She's a little full of it. I didn't like that.
If Republicans only want his secret, private testimony, that is, as the kids say these days, sus. If my Republican colleagues are truly in this to get answers, and I hope they are, stop wasting all our time on holding Hunter Biden in contempt on a deposition and ask him your questions. He'll be here under oath.
And he didn't answer any question.
People can watch.
He didn't answer any
What's
question.
more transparent than that? What's better accountability than letting the American people hear Hunter Biden's answers?
They did hear him, and they knew, and they said he was full of it.
Not political gamesmanship behind closed doors. This is a game where nobody wins and everybody loses. It is Washington at its worst. And I'll tell it like it is without pointing the finger at either party. This sucks. I yield back.
Does any further member wish to debate on the
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Palmer?
I appreciate the gentlelady's remarks, but I do want to point out that one of the reasons it's necessary for Hunter Biden to appear to give a deposition is that he is a material witness in an ongoing investigation of potential corruption at a very high level. I think, to your point, that this is devolved into partisan politics. When we have an obligation as members of this committee, a very solemn responsibility to pursue evidence.
And when, if you guys don't know, when they say the term partisan politics, meaning each party is jockeying for their own interests. So obviously she's a Democrat and she's going to say Joe Biden, you know, hey Paige, what's up? Welcome to the stream. Appreciate having you. Obviously she's going to say something like, oh no, why is she going through this kind of stuff? So, you know, well, this guy, you know, obviously, you know, he's saying that, listen, we know you're going to vie for your own party, but he's facing some serious issues.
Legitimately, and not let it become what it has become today. And I don't think we're getting there. I do think that Hunter Biden has a responsibility to respond to the subpoena through his legal counsel, if he so chooses, in a responsible way. What he did in showing up outside the steps of the Senate is contemptible. He should have done that. But we need to investigate this. We need to follow the evidence. And he needs to appear as a material witness to an ongoing investigation. If he comes in to testify before this committee, there are other issues related to his activities that I think would be germane. But I really believe at this point we need to move forward with this And frankly, I think Hunter Biden should have responded to the subpoena and either himself or through his legal counsel. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Holman, we've heard discussion about using technology to secure the border, but technology really doesn't secure the border. It allows you to see who's coming to the border. And if you've got agents tied up processing people crossing illegally, it really doesn't do anything in terms of interdiction. Is that correct?
Can I respond to the earlier remarks, sir, that was saying I did something that wasn't said at all? I think it's important we set the record straight here. I never said at CPAC I didn't care about family separation. What I said was, I didn't care
Mr.
about...
Chairman, was he recognized for this purpose? Is this from your time?
The chair recognizes you make it as brief as you possibly can, and I think you've already said you didn't.
I've
say
never
that.
said I didn't care about family
Okay,
separation. What I said, I didn't care
let me-
about being sued because I get to give a sworn statement that set the record straight.
Okay. I want to get back to some things here. When you have.
Chairman, I'd like to enter into record this article from
This-
Newsweek.
the
Trump's ICE
gentleman's
director
not
doesn't care
recognized. The
about
gentleman's
families
not-
being separated.
You're
Thank you.
claiming my time.
Washington.
It's my time. The gentleman's not recognized. You're claiming my time. Will you reset the clock? Not to 5 minutes. I think it was about 4:30. I'll just be a little more brief. Okay, the point that I was trying to make is I talked with a rancher a couple of weeks ago down at the border, and he told me that since December 28th, that he had the same fence cut 77 times by people who were not being interdicted by the Border Patrol. He told me that on January 4th. That's 77 times in 6 days. If people are really concerned about coming in here to get a job, to seek asylum, why would they not want to be picked up by the Border Patrol, Mr. Holman? And be brief if you can. I've got a number of things I want to run by you.
Well, you're talking about 1.9 million gotaways. Why didn't they take advantage of the giveaway program? Because they don't want, obviously, they don't want to be fingerprinted, they don't want to be vetted, they don't want to turn themselves to the border.
Is it true that the Border Patrol charges less to the people who will wade across the river and turn themselves in than they do to the people that they try to get in here undetected?
The cartels will charge less for people that want to turn themselves in rather than get into Chicago.
And they're also financing this and hold these people making payments for 8, 10, 12 years to pay off the financing for paying the cartels to get them in?
Some, yes.
There's some doing that. The other thing that I want to point out, when you said 1.9 million gotaways, does that include people that we don't know? Or is that an estimate of the ones that we know got away, we saw them and couldn't catch them?
The known gotaways are captured on video, drone traffic, sensor traffic, where the Border Patrol sees
Is it 1.9 million known or unknown? Or
We don't know how many unknown, because there's large parts of the border, like Marfa Sector, the Big Bend National Park, where there's very little
I
technology.
want you to be brief, because I want to hit some other things. We know that in fiscal year 22-23, we had 169 known or people on the suspected terrorist watch list. Since 2020, it's 312. Mr. Holman, how many did it take to carry out the attacks on 9/11?
9.
19.
I'd like to,
19.
I'd like to say that under the Trump administration, 4 years, we had 11.
Okay, but it took 19 to carry out the terrorist attacks. And in regard to the unaccompanied children, there's somewhere between 85,000 and 100,000 that we don't know where they are. And if it were 100, it would be a tragedy, okay? And we're not doing anything in terms of collecting biometrics or anything like that to try to find these children. And when you've got children being brought across the border as gotaways, what purpose does that serve or potentially could serve, Mr. Holman?
Well, based on my 30 years in doing investigations and trafficking, some of them will be sex slaves, some will be
Sex with me so amazing. All this work, no vacation.
Mr. Byer, I've ran a think tank and I pretty well understand some of these economics. I've done a lot of work with Cato. I'm very disappointed in the position that you've taken, frankly, because you don't want to have illegal drugs, so it wouldn't be a problem bringing drugs across the border under the policies you guys would advocate. But in terms of labor, They changed, the Bureau of Labor Statistics changed how they count unemployment back in 2012, 2014, somewhere in that range, and stopped counting people who are no longer looking for a job. So that's one of the reasons why you have such a low unemployment rate. Mr. Holman, I want to get back to what the cartels are doing here. I asked a former drug czar if we've come from a war on drugs to a war with drugs. It's been mentioned several times that we've had over 100,000 people die from drug overdose, and that probably about half of it is fentanyl related. Now they've added another additive to the drugs called Trank that Narcan doesn't work on. Does it appear, considering the source of the chemicals to make these drugs that are being provided to the cartels, that we may actually have a war with drugs and that these people are casualties?
I can tell you that the fentanyl doses are getting more and more serious. Overdose deaths are gonna happen a lot more often. The current cartels are making record amounts of money now, moving narcotics between the ports of entry, smuggling people and trafficking people. And for an earlier statement that most fentanyl come to the port of entries, I disagree. We don't know what's coming between the ports of entry because 90% agents are off the line.
That's right. And my last point, I want to reiterate the thing about the cages. I was at the border in 2015 during the Obama administration. Children were in those cages for a reason. And if the Biden administration wanted that stopped, they could have stopped it day one. I yield back and now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Moskowitz, for 5 minutes for his question.
Chairman, is it in order now for me to enter things into the record?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what I was trying to enter into the record is the article from Newsweek saying Trump's ICE director doesn't care about families separated at the border. Mr. Holman, the correct quote is, "I'm sick and tired of hearing about family separation. I'm still being sued over that. I don't give a shit," right? And also I'd like to enter into the record this article saying internal emails show ICE agents struggling to substantiate Trump's lies about immigrants.
So ordered without objection.
We thrive under pressure to push the boundaries of what's technologically possible. 20,000 pounds per square inch, or PSI. This is a new deep water benchmark and will help us produce up to 75,000 barrels of oil per day.
I see myself as this smart, strong woman. I've never experienced anything like this. I'll do whatever you tell me to do.
A hot sub you dip into hot au jus? Firefighter approved.
Unique homes, uniquely placed, uniquely.
I thank the gentlelady, and I now go to Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to respond in regard to whether or not this is a pause or a ban. It takes years to get permits for an LNG facility. There are billions of dollars in capital investment involved. And what's really happening here is this administration understands that. They don't understand a whole lot about science, but they understand a whole lot about politics and permitting. And I think they're deliberately creating uncertainty about permit approval. I mean, the Department of Energy in December announced that the project's not yet operational. Will have to reapply for the permits if their permit was approved more than 7 years ago. That's billions of dollars in investments that could go down the drain. But they've created uncertainty in order to stifle investment and to discourage foreign governments from entering into contracts with companies who might not be able to provide the product. So in regard to whether it's a pause or a ban, it's a ban. I want to point out a couple of things. One, we probably saved countless numbers of lives in Europe over the last couple of years because we've been able to provide LNG. Even with that said, because of the move to renewables in Europe and their reliance on Russian gas, 68,000 Europeans died last winter in what was a relatively mild winter because they couldn't afford to adequately heat their homes. These were people with cardiovascular respiratory issues. And I've repeated this time and time again. It gets no response from the other side. Same thing's happened in the UK. But what I want to get into is, Mr. McCown, in your testimony, you made the comment about this being a national security issue. I think it is. It absolutely is. You even mentioned something that doesn't get mentioned around here very often, that America is the arsenal of democracy. I think a significant part of that arsenal is our enormous energy capacity to aid our allies in emerging economies. Would you like to comment on that briefly?
Yes, thank you very much. It is, and we have always been the supplier. I mentioned earlier today that we supplied most of the oil and gas used during World War II. We export a lot of things, and it's very helpful, and we do it in an environmentally friendly way. We are more highly regulated than almost any other country in the world, and we do it safely. And by removing that, what we are going to see is increases in emissions from around the world, not decreases. And I think it's something we have to take very
But
seriously.
you also understand that China is an adversary. And I've told people this many times, the war in Ukraine didn't create the energy crisis, it exposed it. And the thing that everybody should learn from that is that no nation should be reliant on an adversarial nation for something that's critical to its economy and its national security as energy. You see what's happening right now is that you've got a number of non-government organizations and nonprofit groups pushing for an energy transition in the United States, and they did the same thing in Europe, being funded by Russian and Chinese dollars. And
Yes, that's true. And, the transition is not an overnight occurrence. I think we all agree we want clean, cheap, affordable, and responsible fuel sources. The issue of pushing a premature transition upends our economic and national security. We need an all the above kind of guy, but we need a responsible pathway toward net zero.
Well, I worked for 2 international engineering companies, did everything from environmental systems to refuse to energy to aerospace. And there's some fundamental physics involved in an energy transition that apparently my colleagues across the aisle do not understand. We're not going to get to net zero by 2050 under any scenario. It's not possible. What we will do is wreak unimaginable destruction on the American economy. And going back to what's happened in Europe, in the UK in 2008, they wanted to be the model for shifting to renewables. They wanted to be set the model for Europe. Well, in terms of peacetime economic growth, their growth is the slowest since 1780. That's not 1980 or 1880. That's 1780, the year before Yorktown. And that's where we're heading. And just Mr. Chairman, just one point here. Venture Global's Gulf Coast CP2 would supply about 5% of the world's LNG by 2026. That would have a bigger impact on the U.S. economy than any green energy project. It would produce about $600 billion in revenue over the lifespan of the project, thousands of jobs, and reduce greenhouse emissions by 140 million tons a year. I cannot imagine for the life of me why we've got groups funded by Chinese money and Russian money that they're really about reducing emissions, when I'm really concerned that it's really about a threat to our national security. With that, Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Looks overseas for people who have technology, information that it wants, particularly technology.
Open the door to the savings you deserve with Leon Health, offering up to $167 back each month on your Social Security check, and preferred brand name and generic prescriptions 100% without limits and at no cost at our preferred pharmacies. Call now.
If we're gonna do this, we need to set some rules.
Your behavior is unacceptable.
Is it?
Your family is everything to me. Don't you ever show up at my house again.
You're my baby girl.
Everyone said I'd have to leave my job to earn a marketing degree. Everyone except WGU. Their competency-based online model let me complete assignments and take tests at my pace, with no set login times. Apply free at wgu.edu.
Same thing. You look at Arabella. There's hopes of fundamentally upending the local news marketplace and buying a place in the local news. Now, Mr. Graham, Mr. Irwin, you can respond to this. I think it's pretty evident that content is driven by your revenue sources. Would you agree with that? Yes or no?
Yeah, there has been this tendency now in public media, obviously, they'll tell you that they're provided, they're supported by the MacArthur Foundation or something. But private journalism too.
Well, and Mr. Irwin, if you'd like to respond, it's a yes or no, really.
Yes, and that includes tax dollars.
Well, the point that I want to make is that you agree that revenue drives content. Okay, if you're not providing the content, then the money's not going to be there. And we've kind of gotten wrapped around the axle a little bit about taxpayer funding of this, which I think is wrong. Frankly, I think we shouldn't be funding left-wing propaganda. But I do think we need to look at the content and the source of revenue. And if you start looking at, for instance, who funds these organizations, they're the same people who make political contributions to left-wing Democratic candidates. They're also, and this is what's really interesting to me, some of these foundations are the same people who are funding the pro-Palestinian demonstrations. I mean, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, for instance, the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. David Rockefeller has been very open about his support of some of these demonstrations and is a major supporter of Democratic candidates. Mike and Nick Pritzker, the Hyatt Hotel family. Same thing. You look at Arabella, which is a conglomerate of funding sources of left-wing foundations. William and Flora Hewlett, David and Lucille Packard, the Ford Foundation, Robert Wood Johnson, Gordon Betty Moore Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation. Isn't it interesting that these are the same people who fund NPR? Would you think it would have an impact on content, Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the socialist critique of the news media used to be that, if Ford's funding the news media, then it must all be pro-big business. Well, a lot of times today in public broadcasting, when you just listen to them saying, the show is brought to you by the Public Welfare Foundation for Transformative Justice. I mean, they do announce, basically, we are giving money to get a certain result. Back under the Obama years, NPR actually took money from a charity called the Plowshares Fund, explicitly to report on the Iran arms, the Iranian arms thing. They were supporters of giving Iran
These are
arms.
the same foundations that are funding the radical climate agenda that has caused food prices to skyrocket, household energy costs to skyrocket. They're the same people who advocate open borders. They're the same radical left funding anarchist groups. They're the same individuals behind the foundations who fund Democratic candidates who then advocate for more left-wing radical policies that have created a border crisis, made food unaffordable, and have made our communities less safe. And so my point, gentlemen and my colleagues, is that what we're really talking about here is a major network funding a propaganda machine that supports left-wing policies, that completely ignores conservative points of view, that the same people who are funding this propaganda machine is also funding liberal Democratic candidates. And they're the same people funding these protesters and these anarchist groups. Gentlemen, you're welcome to respond. Mr. Graham, Mr. Irwin.
I would just add that Catherine Marr comes from this world. She was previously the head of the Wikimedia Foundation. She is on the board of Signal. And she's explicitly said the First Amendment is a problem. Her tweets have become somewhat famous, but she's one of their operatives. And absolutely taking over NPR is part of their desire to drive what everyone's able to think and what narratives are allowed in our society.
I just think you have to look at the 990s and you know, look at who's funding this to really understand what's going on here. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to have this. I think this hearing was justified, and we should have had it a long time ago. And I agree with my Democrat colleagues. I'd be happy to have another hearing and bring the CEO of NPR in here to answer some of these questions.
And I hope we will at a time that's more convenient.
Lay it back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from El.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, in response to a question a little while ago about the sale of oil from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, you said that that was in response to the war in Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes.
The first sale under the Biden administration occurred in November 2021. Sold 50 million barrels in an attempt to lower gasoline prices. That's 3 months before the war began, so I think you need to reevaluate your answer. By the way, the price of a gallon of gas in December of 2020 was $2.28. December 21, it was $3.41. This according to the Energy Information Administration. December 22, it was $3.32. So the administration sold 50 million barrels plus the additional barrels they sold later, as you say, because of the war in Ukraine, to affect gasoline prices by 9 cents. And by the way, according to EIA, the price of a gallon of regular gasoline right now is $3.73, $1.45 a gallon higher than it was in December 2020. You made a comment while you were in Paris that China's dominance in the world's critical mineral supply chain is one of the pieces of the supply chain that we're very concerned about in the United States. Do you stand by that?
Yes.
I'm very appreciative of that because I agree 100% that China is the existential threat to our economy and to our national security. But what's interesting is Alabama just rejected a Chinese Communist Party tied EV company's project that would have been located in northwest Alabama near Muscle Shoals that is now being located in Michigan. Did you have any role in the decision to locate that plant in Michigan?
No.
Thank you for the answer. Because I think it's interesting that decisions are being made to bring companies in that have direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party to build EV batteries when we are already overly dependent on China for our critical minerals. As a matter of fact, China is responsible for 60% of the worldwide production and 85% of the processing capacity. It's not just a matter of whether or not we mine the minerals here. It's a matter of whether we're able to process them or refine them. And I don't think there's a major rare earth refinery in the Western Hemisphere. So I just am concerned about where we are in critical minerals. I don't think our future's in electric vehicles, not in the short term, definitely. But I do think that this mass transition to renewables is making us even more, is creating an even greater national security risk because of our dependence on China for critical minerals and rare earths and the processing and refining.
May I respond to that?
Yes, ma'am.
The administration shares your concern, and that's why we've signed the president has signed into law and Congress has passed all of these incentives to bring critical minerals extraction, refining, processing, incorporation into the battery in the United States. As I was saying at the very beginning, because of these incentives, our U.S. graphite production, for example, is expected to increase 25-fold by 2030. Our lithium extraction and processing is expected to increase 85-fold. So we want to get those processors here so that we can be independent.
Appreciate what you're trying to do there, but the problem with us is the permitting. We need to take an attitude, a position that this is so critical to our national security that we permit some of these mines immediately, and we're not subjecting ourselves to endless litigation on the permitting. We're going to abide by all the environmental rules. But your your goals of achieving 100% renewable are not achievable with our dependence on China. Our goals of our national security and the security of our economy are not achievable as long as we have this dependence on China. And we're not going to get there in the mining, the processing, and the refining unless we reform our permitting process. Are you willing to participate in that effort?
Yes, absolutely. I agree with you on that. And that's the whole point, is that we want to become independent of China, and bringing all of that here or with allies is so important. The full steps of the supply chain.
Well, I really would encourage the administration to be more sensitive to our positions on energy, critical minerals, rare earths, and on not inviting China to come in and build facilities here that will compromise us. And I do appreciate your responses. It's one of these rare times that you and I have agreed, but I do appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Ms. Lee from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we've heard today, my Republican colleagues would like to use this hearing to bolster this narrative that the Biden administration is enacting a war on energy.
I want to stay on that theme of Ms. Crockett. What percent of I want to clarify it again, what percent of GAO recommendations are not implemented?
Well, there's two sets of numbers. If you talk about all our work and all our reports, not just this one we're testifying
You don't
on.
do the work for no good reason, so I would assume that 100% should be implemented. So what percent?
75 on average, 75% of our recommendations. That's pretty steady over time.
They are or are not?
They are.
Okay,
They are
so
implemented.
a quarter or not.
Right.
But I would assume that the other 25% would result in savings, more efficiency in the operation of the federal government agencies, and they should be implemented.
Right.
Some of these recommendations that you've made from the past conversations you and I have been open for a long time. Is that correct?
Some of them, yes.
Yeah. What could be done to ensure that the GAO's recommendations are implemented?
Yeah, we just issued this week a report listing every open matter that we have from congressional, that we've suggested to the Congress, along with what cost savings could occur if the Congress implemented our recommendations. So we've been asked by the Congress to address this issue. Give us in one report all your open matters that you've recommended to Congress, and it just came out a few days ago. Of there, we're 21 matters open that could save over $1 billion, or 20 of them, or 12 of them could be over $1 billion. The other ones are millions or hundreds of millions.
But
I'd be happy to submit that report for the record here.
well, Mr. Chairman, I think we could help on the implementation side, obviously with legislation, but also with oversight. Because I do think it's incumbent upon agencies to act on these recommendations. And the history of GAO's recommendations are pretty well documented, some substantial savings to the federal government. A couple of things I want to ask about. You've made some recommendations on disposable radioactive sources, or you looked into that. Have you made recommendations on disposal of radioactive sources?
Yes.
Have they been acted on?
Not yet.
How about safeguarding, now this is something I think is extremely important, is safeguarding federally funded research from foreign threats.
I don't believe they're fully implemented yet.
Mr. Chairman, I think that the failure to safeguard research, that federally funded research, and from my perspective, any domestic research that impacts our national security needs to be, those recommendations need to be fully acted on.
I don't think, Mr. Congressman Palmer, that those sets of particular recommendations will be implemented without congressional attention and action.
You think they will be?
They will not be.
They will not be.
They will not be fully implemented.
Mr. Chairman,
That's my opinion.
I think we need to make this a priority. And I know it's going to shock you that I'm going to ask about improper payments because we've spent years working on this. But you're talking about duplications. In the case of duplication, is that not also a problem in terms of improper payments?
Well, it could be depending upon, it doesn't really fit the definition that we have, but we have, it fits In addition to overlap duplication, we include cost savings and revenue enhancement. So the cost savings and proper payments fit within that category.
You say if we could eliminate some additional duplications, would save another $70+ billion?
Well, no, we said that was what was saved from last year's report to this year, so that's in the bank already. There are tens of billions of dollars that could be implemented. We have a report coming out soon that has a simulation. If all of GAO's open recommendations are implemented, they have financial benefits. And a lot of our recommendations are improve economy and efficiency can't be measured. Improve public safety, for example. You'd save up to $180 billion.
We've had this discussion in the past as well about in regard to improper payments, and I think it would apply to duplications, and that is the failure of coordination and in some cases communication between federal agencies and between federal and state agencies.
Right.
And I think when we first started this discussion, one of the big issues that we identified was antiquated data systems.
Right.
How much of a problem is that now? Does that persist?
It's still a problem and an impediment. It's not the only one, but it's definitely one. And I think, for example, much more attention to the Congress ought to be paid to the Medicaid program.
Right.
Medicaid program is one of the fastest growing programs. Each state's a little bit different. The other area of antiquated programs that the Congress really ought to focus on as well is unemployment insurance. That was a huge problem that led to a lot of fraud. And if we have at some point there's going to be another economic downturn or some issue, we're going to rely more on the unemployment insurance to help people who are really in need of help. If you don't have those systems modernized, you're going to have a real problem. I know when the pandemic came and Congress didn't want to send the $600 to everybody in supplemental payment, they wanted to gear it to whatever that person was earning at that time. So you didn't overcompensate people more in unemployment than what they were gaining from their job. But the systems couldn't do that. I got calls ahead of time, could we do that? And it just wasn't possible at that time.
We've got all kind of problems with this. I was very involved in Alabama looking into fraud in respect to that. We've taken down a lot of the guardrails, just failure to verify eligibility and responding to requests for unemployment benefits from foreign IP addresses.
Right.
I mean, it's across the board. Mr. Chairman, I do think that some of the things we've discussed today would merit congressional action. I think additional oversight from this committee. I could go on for quite a while. Mr. Darrow and I have had many discussions about some of these issues, and I greatly appreciate the work of the GAO and your staff. You do a great job. We got to do a better job, though, of making sure that these recommendations are implemented. I yield back.
We thrive under pressure to push the boundaries of what's technologically possible. 20,000 pounds per square inch or PSI. This is a new deep water benchmark and will help us produce up to 75,000 barrels of oil per day.
A hot sub you dip into hot au jus? Firefighter approved.
Millions of people have lost faith with Noom, like Clay Bossier, who found the perfect companion to his GLP-1 journey.
Being able to track the progress when you open an app, they're definitely teaching me new habits so I do not have to be on weight loss meds forever.
Get Noom GLP-1, now available at Noom.com. Current owners and lessees of an eligible non-GM vehicle get $3,000 purchase allowance on most 20...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past 14 years, GAO.
We get Chair now recognize Mr. Palmer from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Last July, 13 state attorney generals from across the country co-signed a letter directed to the CEOs of Fortune 100 companies, warning them of the serious legal consequences over race-based employment preferences and diversity policies. They did that in consequence of the decision of Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard. Mr. Berry, can you speak to the impact or applicability of that case on the legality of DEI corporate policy in both the federal and state context?
Certainly. So while it arises in the context of university admissions, the Harvard case looks at some of the most commonly proffered justifications for racial preferences and finds them lacking as a matter of strict scrutiny constitutionally and statutorily under Title VI. That disapproval of the supposed the presented pedagogical benefits of skin color, not viewpoint, skin color diversity, for example, that was rejected, and those same kinds of rationales for skin color diversity would not be available in the Title VII context. I think is the most natural reading.
So should companies look to modify their hiring practices?
So some are, others have not gotten the memo and are still pretending that these are completely distinct, which is not a good reading.
DEI is good for business, isn't that corporatism over individual rights?
So historically, money-making has never been a judicially cognizable rationale for racial discrimination, and there's no reason we should be starting with that now.
Thank you for that clarification. Mr. Rokita, I think your state was one of the states that were included in those letters, the Fortune 500 companies. The Democrat state attorneys general criticized this letter. They condemned it for its tone of intimidation, which purposely seeks to undermine efforts to reduce racial inequalities in corporate America. How do you respond to that critique?
Well, the fact of the matter is, attorneys general have a duty to enforce the law. And what we were doing in that letter, unapologetically, was enforcing Title VII, which says it's unlawful to discriminate on the basis of sex, color, religion. And that's exactly what a DEI program does. By definition, it has to go against Title VII. And it's surprising because we're all celebrating here and in most places how good Title VII has been over the decades. I've heard testimony and comments from both sides of the aisle here today. And to have Attorney General say, well, enforcing Title VII is now threatening is disheartening and confusing and sad. So we stand by our letter. Where appropriate, when we can, we will enforce the law.
So you're basically saying that you want to protect the rights of all Americans.
Right.
In terms of their opportunity to gain
Just
employment.
as the Civil Rights Act envisioned.
I agree with you, and I'm grateful for the position that you've taken on that. Ms. Stepman, in your role as Senior Policy and Legal Analyst for IWF, you've promoted policies that advance women's rights. I've been involved with IWF for many years, having worked in the think tank world, and really very appreciative of what your organization's done. What do some of these policies look like from your perspective in terms of your efforts to end discrimination across the board in regard to women?
Right now, we're focusing a lot on protecting the rights of women under both Title VII and Title IX in the face of a redefinition of the word sex that somehow eviscerates all of the protections that women have counted on, relied on, fought for when it comes to males who claim identity as the opposite sex. And in the Title VII context, as I said, in my testimony, we've already received inquiries from women who are being forced to shower with fully intact, males as part of their job. When again, it's funny in the context where the definition that the EEOC enforces of harassment is in so many other cases so stretched, right? A stray joke, an unintentional remark, right, can be characterized as creating a hostile working environment on the basis of sex, and yet a man waiting to shower with his colleagues to see them naked in the shower is considered not just not qualifying as harassment, but actually something that's required by the EEOC. Well, it's not required by Title VII.
So, just one last point here, Mr. Chairman, is that the Biden administration dropped over almost 1,600 pages of regulations that redefine sex to include gender identity. In other words, they have difficulty in defining what a woman is. What was the Biden, in your opinion, what was the Biden administration's primary goal in administering these regulations?
I mean, I can't speak for the Biden administration, but it seems to be to cater to, their own activist side. This is definitely not good for women. This has consequences far-reaching, and it's actually, frankly, the regulations, as you mentioned, are 1,577 pages long. There's a lot in there. This redefinition of sex obviously has massive consequences for women in sports and locker rooms, but there is a lot else in there that's bad for everybody. These regulations gut due process and contravenance of federal courts who have said that it's necessary to provide every American with due process when accusing them of something as serious as sexual harassment. They eat into what the Supreme Court has clearly said is protected speech in terms of, for example, using pronouns that match the biological sex of a person, and also just, any kind of remarks about, for example, the role of men and women in society. You've seen the definition under Title IX of harassment expand and expand and expand, and once again, in these regulations, that's put into guidance and now regulation by the Biden administration in a way that's totally contrary to the idea of free speech and is frankly insulting to the idea, again, that we're trying to prevent, which is actual sexual harassment that everyone would recognize as such.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, apologies, I have a UC request. I'd like to seek unanimous consent to enter into the record this follow-up letter from 21 AGs.
Thank you very much. We'll now begin our 5 minutes of questions. The chair recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Thank the chairman. Mr. Reagan, you and my Democratic colleague mentioned the great work of the EPA. I just want to point out that the photograph that he showed and the subsequent cleanup of the Cuyahoga River is indicative of all of our commitment to cleaning up our environment. And we've made remarkable progress. Since 1980, our economy's grown by 791%. Vehicle miles traveled has gone up 113%. Population's increased by 47%. That's probably not counting the illegals that have crossed our border. Energy consumption's up 29%. But the 6 criteria gases that the EPA tracks have all gone down 60%. And that's your data. One of the things that concerns me is about how you've gone about things and basically taking the lawmaking authority away from Congress. I'm very encouraged by the overturning of the Chevron deference that the Supreme Court did last week because it restores the responsibility for lawmaking and the accountability for lawmaking to Congress where it belongs. But there's another thing that the EPA has been engaged in that concerns me, and that's basically sue and settle. In March of this year, the Inspector General issued a report that found the EPA does not properly store its procurement data, paving the way for fraudulent, collusive behavior with vendors receiving contracts and subcontracts. This prevents the Inspector General from adequately conducting oversight. Are you doing anything to correct this?
We have.
Say yes or no.
We have, yeah.
Okay, good. I'd like to know if you would report to the committee in writing what you've done to correct this, because it's not the first time these questions have been raised about the EPA's potential collusion with friendly outside parties, especially when environmental groups during litigation. As I said, sometimes referred to as sue and settle litigation. So when was the last time the government audited the EPA litigation? Have you had an audit?
I'm not quite sure which specific audit you're referring to, but
your litigation.
We welcome all audits.
Well, I would like to know and report to the committee whether or not you've had an audit of EPA involvement in litigation. The Biden administration revoked the Trump administration's policy to publish and notice settlement details in pre-litigation announcements. And I want to know what efforts the EPA has made to reduce the settlement costs using taxpayer dollars. Can you report to that to the committee as well?
Yes, we can report to the progress we've made to evolve that document to provide more transparency, which is what those changes.
But I want to know how much you've spent taxpayer dollars in these settlement cases. And if the government auditors cannot access data to adequately track management of contracts or litigation costs, then what resources are available to Congress and the public to track the taxpayer expenses for these activities? Do you have any response to that in terms of your oversight? Because you should be reporting to Congress with full transparency about your litigation efforts in these sue and settle cases.
I do believe that we are reporting responsibly to Congress. I meet frequently with my Inspector General. We have taken just about all of the recommendations.
Well, your Inspector General, as I said, reported that you do not properly store your procurement data, which paves the way for fraudulent collusive behavior. And that's one of my big concerns, is that there's been collusive behavior, involvement with these outside groups. I want to move to something else that concerns me too, is the House of Representatives sent 2 letters to the EPA. One was in December of last year, one was April of this year, signed by 22 members respectively, including 10 members of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Both the letters raised serious questions about whether the EPA's proposed $2 billion regulation on the lime industry is necessary, given that the EPA's own scientists have determined that the emissions from lime plants are already acceptable with an ample margin of safety. And in September of last year, the House Science Committee held an oversight hearing, and you testified that you think, and you said this, I think what we want to do is to ensure that we're meeting the letter of the law with as much flexibility as possible. I think we have to be reasonable, and I think what we want to do is protect public health and ensure that these industries can be productive. How in the world is finalizing a $2 billion regulation providing as much flexibility as possible and being reasonable?
Well, I think if you look at that finalized action, we took into consideration many of the recommendations that industry asked us to.
You know what lime is used for?
To
Mr.
health and
Administrator Reagan, you know what lime is used for?
I absolutely do.
What's it used for?
We can use for a lot of things.
Yeah, but what is it primarily used for in the construction?
You can use lime for agriculture. You can use lime for construction. I mean, there's a lot of.
You can't make, it's a key ingredient in concrete cement.
It's a key ingredient in a lot of things. It's not just cement.
And you just imposed a $2 billion regulation on it, and all that cost can be passed on to consumers, the increased food prices.
We put protective standards in place so that workers and people who are exposed to lime.
But your own administration says that you've determined it's acceptable with an ample margin of safety. That's not reasonable.
It's acceptable in certain instances. I think that's a narrative or a context that I'd love to have this conversation. Maybe we could look at the full breadth of the statement that the scientists are making. I'm very aware of the statements that our scientists are making, and so I think that may be out of context.
Well, I'm very encouraged by the Chevron deference being overturned, because it will restore to Congress our lawmaking authority and remove it from these agencies. I yield back.
And gentlemen, time's expired. We went a minute over, so the Democrats can have that extra minute at some point. Chair now recognizes Mr. Palmer from Alabama for 5 minutes.
Director Cheadle, did local law enforcement ESU teams have compromised authority to engage a perceived threat?
Yes.
Why do you think they didn't use it?
I believe that they follow the same use of force that our
You don't, when you have compromised authority, you don't have to get permission if you perceive a threat. And there were not just the ESU units, but there were local law enforcement that had line of sight on the shooter before the shots were taken. So one of my questions is there was supposed to be a briefing with the Secret Service sniper units, your counter assault team members, with the contract team, with the local ESU teams. That didn't take place. Why was that?
So I have been told that there has been a briefing. There was a briefing that took place.
I've been told that there wasn't one.
And again, we are still looking into the facts of the investigation. So
Let me ask you this. When were you informed that there was a credible threat against President Trump, former President Trump? When did you learn of that?
Sir, the former president has a number of threats.
I didn't ask you that. There was a credible threat from Iran. When were you informed of that? Answer the question.
We have been monitoring the threats.
You
for the
knew
former
before,
president.
you knew before the rally, okay? All right? The site security plan is generally drafted by the site supervisor and the site agent, probably out of the Pittsburgh district office. Did they take into account the credible threat against President Trump?
Our personnel take into account the threats that are.
Then
out
why
there.
would they leave a building, and I will correct the distance that's been quoted, it's about 140 yards with clear line of sight to the president. Why was that building not occupied on the roof? I mean, you could have put Barney Fife on the roof and kept somebody from getting up there. So why wasn't that done?
The plan that was developed that day encompassed a number
No,
of
ma'am.
security mitigations.
The issue is the site supervisor, the site agent, and the special agent in charge, who I think signed off on the plan, did not include that in the inner perimeter, and they didn't have a plan to secure the building. As I understand it, the Butler County ESU unit was situated on the second floor of a building next to that, but they didn't have a clear line of sight of the roof. The angle was too severe. The photograph that was taken of the young man, of the shooter, when he had the rangefinder, was taken at 5:15. It wasn't until 5:38 that that photograph was transmitted to the Secret Service sniper units. I don't understand the lack of interoperability here in the communication process. I don't understand why people didn't perceive that as a credible threat. The video that Mr. Christian Morphy had shown there was clearly a credible threat. So how is it that all of these mistakes could be made? How many explosive devices were found on or near the site?
Again, I would have to defer you to the FBI.
Madam, I believe they were in his car, and there, I think there might have been one near a main gas line. It wasn't just the fact that he had a rifle, it was the fact that he had the ability to inflict enormous harm, enormous numbers of casualties, had those devices exploded. I want to know also, when your agents conduct a site review, are they fully informed of all of the threats that are being made against the principle that they're protecting?
What I can tell you is that when our agents go out to conduct an advance, their whole goal is to ensure
I
the safety
understand
and
what the goal
security.
is. The failure to secure that building not only put the former president's life in danger, it put the lives of individuals in the crowd in danger as well. I mean, the Reagan shooting, there were other people shot at that time as well. And the Secret Service members' lives were in danger. So I don't understand how you can continue to stay in the position you're in when this was a failure of historic magnitude. 43 years without anything like this happening. And you failed, in this case, in a spectacular way. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Mfume from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to commend you and the ranking member on your joint statement and for holding this hearing that we might all at least attempt to try to get.
Chairman, PACE is designed to look backwards to chase money that has already been paid. What I'd like to know, General Greenblatt, is during the pandemic, there was a massive amount of fraudulent spending, widely referred to as the greatest theft of taxpayer money in history. So has the PACE data center been effective in recovering any of that?
Yes, sir. I think many of those investigations related to the pandemic are certainly ongoing right now and are already delivering returns. The key, though, is what you said at the outset, the initial part of your question there, which is the prevention piece. And that's where we really are pushing for a data hub inside SIGI that will allow us to be affirmatively preventing some of those bad dollars from going out the door.
That was actually my follow-up was, is this forward-looking? And one of the things, I've spent a ton of time working with the GAO on improper payments and things like that. And I think we're far better off if we're in a preventive mode than we are in trying to recover what's gone out. But I just wonder if we've done all these audits on federal agencies, we've identified a number of problems. I get the GAO reports that tell me what % of the recommendation been implemented, and sometimes it's none of them. Have you experienced the same issues with audits done by the inspector generals that never really get acted on, the recommendations never get implemented?
I think some agencies are better than others. I think some of the relationships between the IGs are better than others. And so I think it's a bit of a hodgepodge. Some of them are pretty good about implementing, but some of them are absolutely terrible about it. And so I think the key is two things. One is transparency. And so what we are doing at SIGI is trying to make our open recommendations even more prominent on oversight.gov, which is our primary outward-facing website, so that you all can see them. And then the other part of that, part two of that, is frankly pressure from Congress. If you all see open recommendations that we've identified as significant, come talk to us and we can share with you what are the hot button items that we think the agency should be implementing. And then I think you're going to see product move, if you will.
That's part of the challenge for us is that previous Congress has passed legislation to deal with improper payments, the Improper Payments Reduction Act, and then there was a second version of that, but there was never any enforcement in it. And a number of us, including the Comptroller General, and I have talked about this, is how do you incentivize agencies to actually implement the changes that need to be made? And I would really be interested, and I think the committee would be very interested in hearing from SIGI about this, on how we can actually get some enforcement, for lack of a better word, but incentives, whatever it takes to reduce these improper payments and prevent them in the future. Would you be able to provide some recommendations?
Absolutely, sir. And the impact of congressional attention cannot be overstated. So if I could just share a quick story for you. In my office at the Department of the Interior, we had an audit that revealed that one of the components within Interior wasn't checking some of their contractors against the suspension and debarment list, right? Which is where folks have identified problematic contractors and basically saying, don't give contracts or grants to these folks. They weren't comparing those contractors against those lists. We made recommendations, and they said that some of those recommendations would take 2 years to implement. We engaged with Congress. Congress notified that they were going to have a hearing on that topic, and within 2 weeks, they implemented those very recommendations. So it went from 2 years to 2 weeks just on the letter from Congress. So I would recommend that there is a synergy here between our recommendations and congressional oversight that go well together and would address the very issues that you're talking about, sir.
Have you looked at the Treasury's do not pay system and determined how effective that is in preventing payments?
That would be the Treasury OIG that would do that. So I haven't done that, and frankly, I'd have to defer to them. I'd have to ask them, frankly.
But with this pay system, would you be able to integrate that with other databases like the do not pay system?
That would be the goal, I think, is that we would be able to match up these data sets and identify problematic recipients. For example, the PACE, which you identified, the Pandemic Analytics Center of Excellence. If they had been in existence in 2020 and they had matched up the data that we have now, they could have identified more than 70,000 bad Social Security numbers. So this is PPP loans going out the door with bad Social Security numbers or questionable Social Security numbers that amounted to more than $5 billion that we could have flagged for the SBA and said, wait, pump the brakes on those payments. Let's do another review of those.
See, that raises one of the concerns that I think we have on the committee is the amount of access that the inspector generals have to these other databases, the interoperability of our system to catch things like that. And I'm hoping that's where you're heading with this, is that we have that interoperability, that we have the ability for the Inspector General to have access to other existing databases, like the Do Not Pay system, some of these other things, so that we avoid making these payments.
Yes, sir, that's exactly the vision. And, just like we showed you in that demonstration, a few days ago.
All right, guys. Appreciate you guys watching. Just want to update my people. What's up, Paige? Just want to update my people on some things that's going on in Congress that a lot of you guys might not be aware of. Check out Forbes Breaking News on YouTube, guys. Watch a lot of these videos. Mr. Black Mama 305 signing out.